On the 4th of November 1919, the guns on the Western Front fell silent. The German Empire had emerged victorious. Europe was now in the hands of the Central Powers. The signing of the 1918 Treaty of Brest-Litovsk would mean Germany and Austria would decide the fate of the western territories of the former Russian Empire. Soviet Russia had agreed to renounce all its previous claims in the regions. The German intention for the new lands was to set up a series of economic and political dependencies under hand-picked German princelings. These would serve as buffer states between Germany and Russia. The Germans wanted to prevent Russia from ever being able to wage war against them again, so they deprived the country of 54% of its industrial land, 89% of its coalfields, and 26% of its railways. The Chief of the General Staff, von Hindenburg, said to the Kaiser, "Any peace must give Germany such formidable borders that no enemy would dare start another conflict with us." As for Russia itself, the nation was embroiled in a brutal civil war. The Bolsheviks under Vladimir Lenin had seized power in the October Revolution of 1917 and had quickly spread unopposed throughout European Russia. In defiance of the Soviets, a loose confederation of anti-Bolshevik forces, known as the White Movement, united to oppose the communist government. The Entente powers, supporting the Whites, chose to intervene, with France and Britain landing forces in southern Ukraine and the far north. In the Far East, Japanese forces also arrived to help secure the region. Even Germany's new sphere of influence was starting to come under threat from the Soviets. Incited by Bolshevik agents, multiple revolts were breaking out over the occupied territories. Finland was engaged in its own civil war against the Reds, prompting Germany to intervene on the side of the Finnish White Army. In the Baltics, Germany's attempt to create a united Baltic Duchy provoked Estonian nationalists to rebel against their German occupiers, triggering the Estonian War of Independence. The seasoned General Rudiger von der Goltz was transferred to crush the uprising. While in Ukraine, Bolshevik agitation was widespread. The new Ukrainian People's Republic had turned out to be corrupt and inefficient. The German High Command, concerned with the lack of promised grain, agreed to recognize the coup of the former Tsarist general Pavlo Skoropadsky, a man backed by the Ukrainian Cossacks. Toppling the former government, Skoropadsky was declared the hetman of Ukraine. Eventually, armed with German equipment, he launched an offensive to push out the revolutionary Black Army. By 1919, the German army in the West had finally overrun the Entente defences. This forced the Entente powers to withdraw from their direct intervention in Russia, except for Japan, who remained committed to maintaining their influence over the Far East. The British would continue to attempt to supply the White forces. With the sudden lack of Allied support, the Southern Whites realised the bitter necessity for German aid. Clasping the opportunity and wanting to safeguard their buffer states, the German High Command offered an arrangement to the White General Kornilov. In exchange for full German support, the Southern Whites would have to break off all association with the Entente. Reluctantly, with protestations from other White generals, Kornilov agreed. Meanwhile, a crippling blow struck the Bolsheviks. The leader, Vladimir Lenin, was shot 3 times with a revolver by a disgruntled SR. He would die 2 days later. His death shook the spirit of the Soviet cause. Over in Finland, after months of vicious fighting, the German-backed Whites had recaptured Helsinki, leading to the eventual surrender of the Finnish Reds. the Kingdom of Finland was now secure. The Germans were now actively reinforcing the White Armies. The Northwestern White Army was bolstered by the arrival of Polish and White Ruthenian troops mobilized by Germany. The Northwestern Army began its offensive to capture Petrograd. Simultaneously, the Southern Whites launched the Volga Offensive in an attempt to link up with the Siberian White Army. Red reinforcements, led by Leon Trotsky, dealt heavy casualties to the Southern Whites. However, the start of a Siberian counteroffensive forced Trotsky's army to withdraw. The Southern and the Siberian Whites finally met up in a moment of jubilation for the White cause. The now united White governments gathered for the UFAR Congress to settle the question of White leadership and determine who they should align with. Ultimately, the two governments would unite under Admiral Alexander Kolchak as the supreme ruler of Russia. The Congress agreed to de facto cut contact with the Entente in favor of the Germans. By 1920, Petrograd had fallen to the Whites. The Red Army was shattered and collapsing. Moscow remained the last stronghold of the Bolsheviks. The White Army was now well equipped, with not only German equipment and artillery, but utilizing German advisors and A-7V tanks. Following a brutal siege of the city, the Bolsheviks capitulated. The Russian Civil War was over. The Whites, aided by the Germans, had won. However, the German assistance would come with a price. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk would have to be re-ratified, recognizing the new states in the east. The White generals, not willing to besmirch their honor, decided that a troika of Russian political leaders would sign together. Kolchak, as supreme ruler, was the formal head of the trio, while his two companions were his acting prime minister, Sergei Sazonov, and finally Alexander Kerensky, whose status as the last pre-Civil War head of state gave the delegation a connection to the prior regime. Together, they signed the Treaty of Minsk. Russia was left broken and humiliated. The Kaiser wrote to his sister, "The Russian bear is dead. Never again shall we hear its roar." With Russia no longer a threat, Germany could finally realize its dreams in the east. For the Kingdom of Finland, Kaiser Wilhelm's brother-in-law, Prince Frederick Charles of Hesse, was crowned King Frederick Karl I. The kingdom would become an unofficial protectorate of Germany, sharing close ties. In the Baltics, the suppression of the Estonian rebels finally allowed the creation of the United Baltic Duchy. Duke Adolf Frederick of Mecklenburg was chosen as the head of state, not as a sovereign monarch, but as a subordinate to the German Kaiser. The United Duchy would become a German-dominated puppet state. The Kingdom of Lithuania was also declared. Duke Wilhelm Karl of Urach was proclaimed King Mindaugas II. As for Belarus, similar to Ukraine, a short-lived Belarusian People's Republic existed before ultimately collapsing. The lack of a historic Belarusian state led Germany to establish the Kingdom of White Ruthenia. To give the country legitimacy, the Kaiser's younger brother, Prince Heinrich of Prussia, was granted the throne and crowned King Gendrich I. Lastly, after a century of partitions, the Kingdom of Poland was restored. The Kaiser's fourth son, Prince August Wilhelm of Prussia, was crowned King August IV of Poland. These new kingdoms would serve purely as German puppet states. In Ukraine, Skoropadsky's regime would remain in power in what would become known as the Ukrainian state. In Western Europe, the conclusion of the 1919 Treaty of Versailles had cemented Germany's victory over the West. The Grand Duchy of Luxembourg would be incorporated as a member state of Germany. France would lose much of its overseas territories. The French Protectorate of Morocco was ceded to German control. The German colonial empire annexed all of French Equatorial Africa south of Lake Chad, as well as Dahomey, Côte d'Ivoire, Madagascar, and Belgian Congo. French Indochina and various other French territories in Asia and the Pacific were also annexed. The Kingdom of Belgium would serve as Germany's main deterrent against future aggression. Its strategic location would allow for a fast deployment of troops to easily threaten Paris, and could delay the arrival of British reinforcements. As King Albert I had fled to Britain, the country was remodelled to form a Flemish Walloon kingdom led by the Kaiser's third son. In France, the revolutionary forces of syndicalism had emerged victorious in the French Civil War. Berlin chose to recognise the new state in exchange for re-ratification of the previous treaty France had signed. The question of a possible intervention into the country was considered, but rejected due to the unpopularity of entering into another war. Peace with the Entente was finally achieved in the 1921 Peace with Honour. The only holdout was the Empire of Japan. The Japanese delegation had walked out of the negotiations after refusing to relinquish lands they had captured during the war. Hostilities between Germany and Japan continued. The Imperial Army prepared for an intervention in Asia and dispatched a small detachment to protect their new colony of Indochina from the Japanese. Although peace had returned to Germany, the long years of war had taken their toll. The country was gripped with social and economic problems. The demobilization of the army had created mass unemployment, and rising inflation was crippling the economy. The country was still currently under the military dictatorship of General Erich Ludendorff, ruling through puppet chancellors. The empire was entirely under his influence. After the removal of Chancellor Georg von Hertling in 1918, Ludendorff had named his long-term ally Paul von Hindenburg as the new chancellor. The duo remained immensely popular, credited as the architects of the 1919 victory. Ludendorff himself claiming he was the man who won the war. Describing his position, the general wrote, "One thing is certain, all the power must be in my hands." One of Ludendorff's policies was to resettle ethnic Germans in Eastern Europe. The border strip of neighbouring Poland would be used for the task. Approximately 20,000 square kilometres of Polish territory was formally annexed into the German Empire. The existing inhabitants were expelled, and ethnic Germans, particularly war veterans, were encouraged to settle the land. This was a part of a larger government initiative, the Eastern Aid Programme, which was an intended relief fund to revitalise the bankrupt Junker estates in Prussia. Since even before the war, Germany had long hoped to create an economic and cultural hegemony over Central Europe, a Mitteleuropa. That dream was starting to become a reality. Talks for the establishment of an economic bloc led by Germany commenced in Berlin. It would encompass all countries on the European continent. Even revolutionary France was invited to attend as the discussions dragged on. Many nations dropped out, among them being the French Commune. In March 1921, the economic bloc of Mitteleuropa was established, containing all the newly created countries in Eastern Europe. Germany's former allies of Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire chose not to join. The Union quickly became an economic powerhouse, feeding Germany and guaranteeing her sphere of influence in Europe. Furthermore, the German Empire formed the Reichspakt, a new military alliance to safeguard its subject states. By 1922, Japan and Germany finally signed the Tsingtao Accord, putting to an end the last holdover of the First Weltkrieg. As for the German Kaiser, although he had achieved his dreams of empire, tragedy struck. His Empress Augusta Victoria passed away due to complications of influenza. The Kaiser fell into a depression. While Germany and Britain had signed a white peace, the nations were still in direct competition with each other. The post-Weltkrieg world had descended into a mess of competing great powers, and their arena was the ocean. This led to the start of the dreadnought race. The US, Imperial Japan, Germany and Britain would all start commissioning new, bigger capital ships to outdo each other and attempt to win naval superiority over the seas. The dreadnought took primary focus, seen as unstoppable floating fortresses that could win any battle. As the race proceeded, naval warfare evolved. The British and the Japanese began to take naval aviation seriously, while Germany was convinced that the value of naval aviation was almost exclusively in reconnaissance. The naval race produced a steep economic toll on the competing powers, especially Britain. The Kaiser, who had always been obsessed with building a strong navy, urged his government to commission the largest dreadnought in history, a project he pursued purely out of vanity. He wanted Germany to have the largest and most powerful warship in the world. Naturally, he named the ship after himself. The SMS Kaiser Wilhelm was laid down in 1925. The British nicknamed the vessel the Kaiser's Willy. Entering 1923, Ludendorff and Hindenburg's popularity had plunged to an all-time low. The 1918 Enabling Act had allowed the general to bypass the Reichstag and ignore the parliamentary parties. All factions in the Reichstag were now calling for the reinstation of elections. Newspapers had begun openly criticizing the duo, declaring them dictators. The Polish resettlement policy had also failed, further damaging the general's reputation. To quell unrest, he reintroduced press censorship. Things would come to a head on the 10th of July. Despite the press restrictions, a liberal newspaper went ahead and published a lengthy exposé revealing how the funds intended for the Eastern Aid Programme were deliberately misused by the Ludendorff government, implicating that Ludendorff himself had been encouraging the embezzlement. News of the scandal spread fast and was soon picked up by various other publishers, ensuring that the story couldn't be suppressed. The following day, as the pressure mounted, the general was escorted to the Berlin Palace to meet with the Kaiser. Ludendorff was stripped of his command and ordered to retire. He departed at once. His former ally, von Hindenburg, was not implicated in the scandal and was thus permitted to retire with dignity. The era known as the Ludendorff dictatorship had come to an end. For the first time in a decade, elections were to be held. The border strip of Poland was silently returned to the Kingdom of Poland at their request. The 1923 election was a chaotic time and became known as the Days of the Squallers. In the end, a grand coalition of right-wing parties formed the new government. The Kaiser chose his old friend, Grand Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, the leader of the DVLP, the German Fatherland Party, as the new Chancellor of Germany. The Admiral would embark on a program of economic liberalization. Coming after a period of stagnant internal growth, This coincided with the profits of long-term investments in Mittel Europa finally arriving. The result would usher in an economic boom. The Golden Twenties had arrived. The German GDP grew at an average of 8% annually. This massive growth would lead to a boom in civilian consumption and industrial production. The country was entering one of the greatest economic growth periods in its existence. The improvements in the economy brought upon major shifts in German society and culture. Ordinary citizens embraced the joys of modern consumerism. The Kaiser remarried, choosing a widow 30 years younger than him as his new empress. By 1924, Berlin hosted the Summer Olympics, even inviting Britain to participate. The event was a cultural triumph for the German Empire. In 1925, Great Britain fell to a syndicalist revolution. In the turmoil, the British Empire collapsed. Britain's misfortune, however, was Germany's gain. Von Tirpitz ordered the seizure of the British colonies in Africa and Southeast Asia under the guise of protection. The British holdings in Africa were to be administered by Germany's Mittel Africa until responsible government could be restored in Britain. In China, a limited intervention had secured German dominance over the land. Later on, the Great Depression hit the United States. These series of events effectively ended the dreadnought race. The economic plight of America made way for Germany to become the largest economy in the world. The German mark had replaced the pound sterling and the US dollar as the world's most prestigious and powerful currency. The 20th century was becoming the German century. The ongoing decade was soon referred to as the Golden Era of Germany. The success of von Tirpitz's chancellorship had led to the nation calling him the Second Bismarck. The German Empire was now without question the most powerful country in the world. Its long-desired place in the sun was utterly fulfilled. Imperial pride flourished in the empire. The imperial war flag became the symbol of German hegemony throughout the world. Propaganda films glorying the victory in the Weltkrieg were immensely popular, the most famous being Der große Sieg, the Great Victory. The film portrayed the German soldier as a gallant hero fighting for the fatherland. In memory of the fallen, memorials were built to honour those who had given their lives. They would be commemorated on the 5th of November. As the German Empire reached the 1930s, its beloved Chancellor, Alfred von Tirpitz, would pass away at the age of 81. The nation went into deep mourning. His death sparked a question. What if this was the end of the German Golden Era? For all his successes, von Tirpitz was unable to prevent the rise of a syndicalist alliance. While Germany had expanded its borders, syndicalism had spread throughout the world unchecked. In the Far East, the Empire of Japan lies waiting, eyeing East Asia with great interest. The German Empire had always strived for its place in the sun. Now that it had it, how long would it last? Join us next time for the rise of the Union of Britain.
True to Kaiser. Help us by sharing this content.